Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Forge. A quick look outside your windows and in the supermarkets will make you think that we are indeed in the end times, or at the very least, the purge is actually a real thing and happening as we speak. We assure you it's not. People are definitely overreacting. But in light of the fact that we all, it seems, have more time in isolation at home, here are some things you might want to, or some games you might want to play that are related to an apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic event. So let's get into this. This is no specific order. We just want to talk about some games. So we'll kick straight off with one of the most common, basically the most well-known games in this genre that I would be remiss not to mention straight off the bat, and that's the Resident Evil series. It's post, the T virus being released by Umbrella Corp, set down in like Raccoon City, most of them. Fantastic games, long standing, made into what I would say is probably it's a subpar movie franchise, but still an enjoyable one nonetheless. If you don't mind that kind of level of movie, but yeah, absolutely, very good game. Survival horror is the genre it fits into, but it's absolutely like a post-apocalyptic style. Do you have any?
Yeah, so I guess the next most obvious and probably sort of more recent pick for what most people would think of as a post-apocalyptic franchise is obviously the Fallout franchise. Um, Bit of a rocky franchise recently. Fallout 76 was absolutely one of the most controversial sort of decisions and releases Bethesda have made. But that absolutely doesn't detract from the previous games. I think Fallout 4 is pretty decent. Um, I wouldn't recommend it more than maybe one playthrough, but absolutely, if you go back to Fallout New Vegas, for example, it's a bit dated now, but it's absolutely one of the most fun sort of RPG games of all time, which you would not expect from a sort of post-apocalyptic setting. But I think it's one of Bethesda's best titles to date. Which actually it wasn't Bethesda. I don't think it was. Was it Obsidian? I'm not sure. Either way, um, definitely a recommended apocalyptic game if you're into that sort of thing. And if you like the VAT system and that sort of stuff, that is sort of where it was. Those games are where it sort of came into prominence. So absolutely give those a go.
Absolutely. And in terms of another long-running series, you've got Valve's Half-Life series, starting with Half-Life in 1998, and then you had a few others, Half-Life Opposing Force being one of them, for example. Then there was Half-Life 2. There is one that was set to be released this coming week, actually, Half-Life Alyx. They pretty much make their own games the way they want. They don't really care what people really like say to them. They make the game the way they want to, which means that you're going to get a very good, honest product. But it's essentially first-person shooter set in a post-apocalyptic world with aliens and stuff in it as well. It's pretty fun if you're into that kind of stuff. It definitely is. And look, speaking of, I don't know if you mentioned Fallout New Vegas at all, but that's one of
Yeah,
the
I
most
did.
popular,
Yeah,
if not the most popular. Yep. Sorry, I wasn't listening to you there. It was a pretty awesome game. I would say out of all of them, either three or New Vegas are probably the ones that
yeah.
I would go for if you're casual on that side of things. Um, yeah, and then I guess we've got another one that kind of comes out of a long running series in Darksiders, particularly Darksiders 3. Have you ever had a chance to play that game?
I actually haven't, but I've seen a decent amount about it. But go ahead and sort of explain it for those of us who may not have.
Yeah, so it's the first of two by the same like publisher, at least that I want to see. So it wasn't not the same developer, but the same publisher, THQ Nordic. Um, Basically, it was a bit different to the first two in the series. I haven't played it a huge amount, but it's certainly something that's a bit difficult. It's kind of up there in the borrows a lot from like the Souls series.
Yeah,
Um, so very much like up there for that. But basically, you take control of Fury, who's sister of War and Death, who are two of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. So there's the apocalypse theme, and you've done it from a third-person perspective, and you're basically a mage, and like yeah, like it's all combat based and stuff. It's pretty tough, like it's pretty hard. It's on Unreal Engine 4, so you know how it will play out. and it's only just over a year old, so it's pretty recent too.
Yeah, I think those types of games as well are really easy to sort of get into, but definitely they'll take a good chunk of your time. So if you all the ones we've mentioned so far are fairly easy for you to get into. But if you want something to sort of soak up all your time, if you're stuck in self isolation, absolutely any of the ones we've mentioned so far. I guess since you already sort of touched upon it, the Souls games, not quite post-apocalyptic in the same way because it's sort of a fantasy post-apocalyptic sort of setting, but absolutely that is kind of a really really prevalent theme in the series, especially Dark Souls 3, basically set during the end times of a fantasy world where sort of the world is starting to become sort of undone. So if you're into that type of thing, definitely a lot harder to get into, but a really, really rewarding experience if you learn it. I would definitely recommend playing through 3 at the very least. The Dark Souls 2 and 1 are a little bit dated now. There is a remaster for 1, but the mechanics are still practically the same. So I would mostly say if you're just sort of casually looking to get into the series, start with 3 and see how you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think there's a few, well, as with all of these things, like whilst we've got time, like definitely have to put into some of them. Like not all of them will come straight away. Not least the next one that I'm going to mention, which is also published by THQ Nordic, and it's called Elex. This is this is definitely it's a post-apocalyptic game. It's set on another planet called Magalan to begin with, which is again not the last one in this kind of list that we're going to go through that is set on another planet, but it's still post-apocalyptic. Basically, there's like an event that like kind of throws this planet into this like new civilization, and there's this like element called Elex that kind of gives powers and does stuff and whatever. And you kind of you anyway. Long story short, I'm not going to give away the whole thing, but it's a pretty, in some ways, by the mill. Like I think best for PC type RPG. It's got a story that's I think quite good, and it ticks a lot of elements. However, it's I don't know what the right way of saying it is. Like it's definitely not. It's not a triple A game by any means. So be ready for graphics that are not going to be like AAA level. Be ready for gameplay that's not going to be AAA level. Be ready for some awkward moments. However, there's a lot of intrigue. There's a really rich lore, and I wouldn't be surprised to see at some point like a successor or at least a spiritual successor come out for this one. But it's definitely, if you're into your RPG genre and you don't mind, if you're just into the genre in general, or you want to find like a game that like immerses you with some lore at least, this is definitely one to look out for. You played a little bit of it too. What did you think?
Yeah, so I've played through some of the early sections, and yeah, while it's obviously not a completely tried and true polished AAA game, it's absolutely worth your time if you have a lot of it. It's sort of a standalone game, so there's not really a franchise for you to sort of dive into. But as a game by itself, you take it as it is. It's definitely it has a few nice moments to sort of bring you into it, and if you enjoy the early sections, I definitely reckon it's worth playing through the whole thing. But I guess
Absolutely.
I
Um,
guess to follow up that one, there's quite a lot of sort of zombie games in the post-apocalyptic genre.
well,
Um,
before we get there, can we talk about one other,
yeah, go for
and
it
then we
because
can
there's
get on
so
to
many in the
and then
zombies.
we
Yeah,
can
yeah,
and then we can break down a few that are worth above the rest of
yeah, yeah.
zombies to kind of close out. But it's if we talk about the Gears of War series is next, which is another set on another planet, and a post-apocalyptic event kind of happens where this alien, if you like, alien species comes up from within the planet called Locust, and essentially um, destroy most of the human life like that's on there, and you're part of almost like this resistance, and the soldiers are called Gears. It's basically a first person shooter with an over the shoulder camera, but it was an early one to introduce like functioning cover system, and a really good like options between melee and everything. And genuinely, like the color palette was really kind of browns and grays, but it actually looks amazing for what it was. And it was just a super, super fun game. Your main character is Marcus Phoenix, who's voiced by the same guy that does Bender in Futurama, that does the King from the latest one, Disenchantment on Netflix, that does who's the other one from Adventure Time? Who's the dog in Adventure Time?
Jake.
I always get the names mixed up. Is it Jake? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Jake.
he's a very experienced voice actor, and he does Marcus Phoenix, and he sounds good doing it. And it's just like I'm considering going and getting an Xbox 360 again just to get this game series, literally, and the Halo series, obviously, but like specifically for post-apocalyptic style games. Gears of War. There's I think there's 5 of them now, but the first trilogy in particular is just an incredible trilogy.
Yeah, so I guess with that sort of out of the way, I'll give one last honorable mention. I don't want to talk about it too much because I personally haven't played much of this series, but the Metro games. So there was a more recent one, I think, Metro Exodus, but there was also Metro, I think, 2033 or something like that. Which are fairly popular game series. I think they're one of the sort of forerunners in this post-apocalyptic franchise that don't sort of rely entirely on obvious gimmicks that you would expect. I personally don't have heaps of experience with this series myself, so I don't have too much to say on them, but definitely worth an honorable mention.
Yeah, likewise.
I guess we'll jump straight into then the sort of final little segment of our video where we'll talk about some of the cream of the crop zombie games, because I think there was a massive zombie game craze, which sort of, I guess, kind of overshadowed the rest of this genre and sort of became what everybody expects to see in post-apocalyptic games, despite the fact that they're kind of supposed to be a more niche aspect of this genre. So I guess I'll let you pick one, and then I'll maybe pick one.
Well, I guess we can do a couple of kind of like honorable mentions at least to get some to give some reference to some that are a bit more pick up and play sort of, rather than, in a different way. So for example, Dead Rising games and Dead Island, 2 pretty decent serviceable zombie games. They're good fun, nothing bad to say about them. They're definitely worth it, and if you can pick them up on cheap, which I think most of them are nowadays, like it's definitely worth like a bit of a play. And also there's a recent one that I think that came out last year called Days Gone, which had quite a bit of hype going into it. Probably didn't quite live up to quite all of the hype, but not bad. And I haven't played it yet, but is Death Stranding not somewhat a post-apocalyptic? Have you had much experience in that one?
It is, yeah.
Yet?
I think I haven't actually gone to play it myself. It doesn't really look like my sort of cup of tea, but I think, yeah, it's a post-apocalyptic game, and you spend a lot of the time sort of roaming the wilds of the game. So I think if you're sort of more into the sort of what happens in the natural side of things after maybe a post-apocalyptic event, this is definitely the one for you. I've heard very, very mixed things about it. I think some people really, really like it, and other people sort of, I guess, don't get it or just didn't really find it enjoyable as a game, and that's okay. I think it's sort of one of those things where you have to experience it yourself and formulate your own opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I think we'll get into the cream of the crop, and look, I'll say my top 3, and I'll see, if you wanted to add or take any out. But basically, my top 3 would be Left 4 Dead. Then I would probably have Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare. Technically, it's a expansion, but we can count it as a game in its own right. And then I'd say probably the top one of all is The Last of Us.
Absolutely.
I may have missed out some in there. Some people might say, "Oh, The Walking Dead," or Dying Light is another one that's worth mentioning.
State of Decay is pretty popular as well.
Yeah, that is too. Look, I've never played State of Decay and I've never played Dying Light, so I can't I can't speak for those specifically. I mean, I can see that Dying Light scored very well in many other areas, including 9 out of 10 on Steam, so that's pretty solid. But I've never played it, so I couldn't say to you that it's in my top 3. But my top 3 definitely be Left 4 Dead, which I think is amazing. Um, and the two that I really want to talk about, Red Dead Redemption and Undead Nightmare. This was at a time when expansion packs weren't really weren't like as big as all of that yet. Like it wasn't as much of a thing. Um, and it set a bar that you could bring in this type of expansion pack that would completely change the game, completely add to it, and almost by itself is a standalone thing. Now, if you download Red Dead Redemption or you buy it for your PS3 and you get the Game of the Year edition, you're getting it in there. Like you're getting it with it already as the Game of the Year edition. So that's great. But look, it 10 years ago, graphics aren't where it was now, but it's still serviceable and it's amazing fun. Being a cowboy and shooting the crap out of zombies is incredible.
Yeah, I think it was sort of one of a kind, even really, because most other post-apocalyptic and sort of zombie games are quite. I don't want to say generic, but they've definitely gotten to the point where a lot of them sort of merge together their themes and ideas. It gets a little bit samey. Whereas I think Undead Nightmare is one of the few where it's just nothing has really done the same thing since, and I think that's really, really really cool, and I must recommend it. If you even if you just want to play it for the Red Dead Redemption style, Rockstar Games always really pull through with enjoyable games. But Undead Nightmare especially, really unique and cool. So I guess for the last one, we'll sort of talk a little bit extra about The Last of Us because I think this one deserves a pretty decent segment to itself. Might be a game worth reviewing for us in the future as well. But for now, it's definitely what I would consider the cream of the crop for zombie games as well. Absolutely sort of sets a bar that no other zombie game or even some story games fail to meet. Just an absolutely fantastic, riveting story that leaves you pretty invested in every character involved, even the ones that you don't necessarily play as. You really feel sort of connected to the two major protagonists in this world. You feel their loss at sort of going through the apocalyptic event, and you feel their struggle as they're sort of trying to survive years after the sort of outbreak. And I personally, I have to say, it is my favorite take on zombies in any sort of zombie universe. The zombies in The Last of Us are absolutely amazingly done. It's sort of a rather than a virus, which is usually what they are in other franchises, which rather relevant considering the whole self isolation as of recently. But no, in The Last of Us, they are sort of based on like a fungus, I guess, like a fungi, like spores, which is actually based on a real thing that can afflict ants and other small bugs. But in this, it affects people and sort of turns you into these clickers, where it sort of takes over your nervous system and does a lot of things for you to force itself to survive and spread spores to other hosts. And I just think it's really, really clever and really kind of scary at times because there are parts where you have to stealth. There's not really much chance of you killing some of them, and it really gets you invested in the world. And yeah, absolutely my favorite pick off of this list.
Agreed, and I think that it does something that probably a lot of other the zombie genre in general. I'm talking movies, TV series, books, and all of that within this too. Has attempted this, and I don't think anyone has done it quite as well in such a way that The Last of Us does, where it takes a look at the people part of it more so than anything else, and it's not about like a heroic thing. It's not, it's about there's some different groups that are still knocking about. So you've got Joel and his kind of group. He's in a small group at the beginning of the game. He's the main protagonist. He's lost his young teenage daughter at the start of the game when all this happens, and now he's sort of running with a small crew to try and survive. And then basically gets a job, comes across Ellie, who's the second character, who is immune and is the only one immune to this, and basically how he has to take her to this other group that are going to basically study and then replicate this immunity, and basically it has to travel across the country. So you see like different parts of the country, but the part that I guess there is some sneaking parts, especially where there's clickers, which are the ones that you know, the ones that you can't kill. And realistically, like it does it quite well with like lack of ammo. You have to use makeshift weapons to try and get through scenarios. It's really not easy, and but the worst part of all is whenever the people get involved, and you've got these kind of groups that are after you. You've also got to avoid the military at all costs as well, because there's quarantine zones, etc. And essentially, you've got this situation where you're trying to transport across the country, and then the ultimate plot is, well, I'm not going to give it away, but you see the development on this, and there's one bit where there's a scene where Joel gets hurt, and you have to control Ellie and sort of try and find food, and it's like wintertime at this point, and then you come across this other guy, and like there's a whole like sub thing in there too. It's honestly really, really amazing. And it's just the only surprise it's taken this long for a sequel, because there was a massive uptake. It won all kinds of Game of the Years, and quite rightly so. And it's probably in my top 10 of all time in terms of storytelling, I think, in games at least.
Yeah, it's pretty difficult for me to disagree with that, and it's honestly quite surprising as well, because I think, as we've sort of touched upon, I think the zombie genre as a whole, as you said, movies, books, movies, TV shows, all of that, I think it's very, very oversaturated. There was a huge, huge boom in this genre specifically, and I think The Last of Us really, really does sort of one up everything else, both in storytelling and in just sort of believability. And yeah, genuinely, I don't think there's much that can top it, in its own genre or in other genres.
100%. So if you haven't played it already, and there's one out of all of these like post-apocalyptic games, specifically in the zombie genre, that you really want to get stuck into, we recommend this one, especially in light of the fact that the sequel is it's due any time now when we get the all clear from going on now.
Yep. So with that, unless we have any more honorable mentions, I think that's pretty much it for our post-apocalyptic recommendation list. So let us know if you have any favorites in the comments below as well, because obviously you guys aren't the only ones self-isolating. We're sort of looking for games to play in our free time too. So yeah, definitely let us know.